few days later, I did tell him when he had called once that my trial was up and he could do what he wanted to do, but that I, whether anything happened for us or not, I was not going to continue to do Senior People Meet. I was going to, just cancel and not pay for a subscription. And he said he had decided the same. Hi, everybody. I want to apologize in advance because I start driving and it's very hot and my fan is on. And you're going to hear it. It'll get loud and then it'll die back some throughout the rest of the video. I apologize, but there's just nothing I can do about it. Jim had already been out on a couple of dates before this, and I found out later that he was a fairly new widower. He had been married for 44 years. And from all accounts, from day one, as I got to meet his children and his good close friends, they were totally devoted to each other. It was a very good marriage. She had been sick for about 5 years. Okay, so this is going to freak some of you out because I'm driving, but too hot. I'm at a red light. It was too hot to just sit there with the car not running, so you may hear the car running. I have the fan off. So it was the 4th. He invited me to come to his home for the 4th of July weekend, and I agreed. And his best friend was going to be there and his wife visiting from Memphis. And one of his sons and his family was going to be there. That's what he told me. So before I went up, I told one of my dearest friends. She already knew about him. She knew what was going on. But I told her, I gave her all of the information. His name, his phone number, where he worked, where he taught. I gave her his address, directions to his house, all the information. And I said, if you don't hear from me in 2 days, come looking for me. Call in the authorities. And I headed to his house. And I got there and it was exactly the people who were supposed to be there were there. And they could not have been nicer or friendlier, or I was just welcomed. He had told them all about me and sort of the connections and the same people that we all knew. And that was good. So from that point on, we started seeing each other, and we took a couple of little trips together. And early on, he had, when I was there, he invited a couple of his neighbors who were also from Memphis, and they lived in Memphis, but they had homes in the little area where he lived. And they were down the mountain from where he was, but they were going to be there that weekend. There were 2 couples. And all I knew about them was that both couples, the husbands were gynecologists and retired. So when I met them that night, they came for dinner, and we're talking, and one of them said something about, was telling a story, from where he and the other retired doctor had worked, gynecologist. They were retired, by the way, both of them. And he was telling the story, and it was like a light bulb went off over my head, and I said, where did y'all practice? Where where was your office? What was the name of it? Would you believe 7 degrees of separation here? Would you believe that, okay, wait a second. Their landscaping sod had fallen off their truck, but that's good, it's okay. Would you believe that they had been in practice with my doctor who delivered my first baby that died, and he delivered Jennifer? What are the odds of that? My doctor had started the clinic, and then later they came in with him. It's just, it's crazy. It's crazy. So this was still in the summer, and Jim seemed to be getting serious. I'm going to be really honest with you. I wasn't letting myself get serious. I loved being with him. We had a ball together. We did have a lot in common. We had some things that were different, but we had a lot in common. We certainly, had different lives. He had been married, very happily married, for 44 years, and I'd been single for almost that long. So I guess I had learned enough in all those years of being single, and I had dated enough. Listen, I went for years without a date. I'm stopped at a red light, by the way. I went for years without a date. I don't mean years at a time, but I would go a year without a date easily. But we were just coming from different places. And I knew enough. Again, I was telling myself this, that if he had been married for 44 years, they were pretty much the same. Probably by then they were the same person. I was concerned that Jim may not really know who he really was, that because he had had such a strong connection to her, that I was afraid to let myself get really emotionally involved with him, because again, I was afraid that I would have feelings and he would realize that he wanted someone else. What I was really not what he thought I wanted. So I was afraid. Does that make any sense? I was just afraid that he didn't know who he was, and that he might decide he was a different person as a single man than he was married. And I pondered on it for a while, and finally I talked to him about it. And he assured me that no, this is who he was, that he was not going to change. That this was always who he had been, his values, his likes, his dislikes, his mannerisms. This is who he was. And so I felt pretty comfortable with that. And we continued to get close. And then at Christmas, and he had met Jennifer, by the way, and he had met some of my friends and knew all about, I told him from the very beginning, I said, listen, if we're going to get to know each other, you're going to have to be able to say her name around me. You're going to have to be able to tell me things that y'all did together, travels and that type of thing. And because I've got to be able to say, yeah, well, I did this and I dated this person and we went here or we went there. And, we both had to be able to say her name, his deceased wife's name, and me be able to talk about my ex-husband and men that I dated over the years, and and neither one of us have our feelings hurt, or I guess get bent out of shape about it. That was important to me, and he agreed. He really agreed. So it was Christmas, and I had driven to his house, and then he just Christmas Eve morning, we were going to both drive to Memphis. I take it back, 2 days before Christmas, the day before Christmas Eve. We drove, our plan was to drive to Memphis. I was going to follow him in my car, and because one of his sons and his family lived there. We're going to drive to Memphis, and we were going to have dinner with his family. And then the next day, Christmas Eve day, I was going to drive home so that I could be with Jennifer for Christmas. And at dinner that night, his son and his wife asked me if I would like to call Jennifer and get her to drive to Memphis, and for the two of us to have Christmas with them. I can't tell you how touched I was. And I really didn't have to think about it. I said no. I thanked him for the offer, and I said, Jennifer and I have had this little Christmas tradition for over 30 years. And it's not that wouldn't change that, but I just want to be with her. And they were very understanding. And I drove home to spend Christmas with Jennifer. I am driving through the Walmart parking lot, and I'm going to park right here, and I'm going to have the car running because it's so hot. So that was Christmas. Jim had been talking. He had asked some questions about marriage, and early on, if he asked me how I felt about getting married again, because I'd been single for so long, and I told him I certainly wasn't looking, but I wasn't, if the right person came along, I would certainly be okay with it. I would do it, but I didn't feel like I had to be married. I felt like I would be fine with just a dating relationship. And so, but he would bring it up from time to time. One day he asked if things worked out for us, would I consider moving to where he was, since he was still working and I wasn't. And I told him I thought I would be okay with that. At the time, Jennifer was traveling like crazy all the time. So it was Valentine's Day, and he had cooked a wonderful dinner and had set a beautiful table. And over dessert, I think he made creme brulee, he proposed to me. And he was ready to get married. He said, we are getting older, and we were late 60s. And he said, let's just do it. Why not? I called my dear friend in Memphis. Well, I called Jennifer first, and a couple of friends, but when I called my friend in Memphis, that we've been dear friends for 52 years. I called her. She was a master gardener, and she always had a beautiful yard, needless to say, and her yard was always on the Parade of Homes every year for many years. And when I told her, she said, oh my gosh. Well, and by the way, they had met him. She and her husband had met him by then. But she said, oh my goodness. Oh, here, okay, let me think about this. She said, have you set a date? And I said, well, actually, no, we haven't, but probably soon. And we had already, before I even talked to her, we were sort of talking about maybe going on a cruise and getting married on the cruise, or on an island somewhere, or just going to the courthouse and getting married and then going on a honeymoon. But she said, I am frantically trying to get ready to for the Parade of Homes here in Memphis, and it's going to be the weekend before the 28th of May. I think the 28th fell on a Saturday. And she said, if you will wait, let me get through with my yard for that Parade of Homes, and I would love for y'all to be married in our backyard. And I said, oh, that sounds great. And of course, Jim was on the call. We had her on speakerphone, and she said, look, she said, how many people do you think you want to invite? And we said, just close friends, close friends in our family, that's it. And she said, all right, here's what I want you to do. She said, I want you to show up. She said, send me a list of who you want invited. And she said, I'll get them invited. I will do everything. I will take care of everything. You just decide who you want to marry you and do that, and you just be here. I'll take care of everything else. And that's what we did. We got married, and in her backyard. And it was beautiful. My sister, you've heard me talk about my sister. My sister makes the most beautiful cakes, always has, you've ever seen. And she made our wedding cake. Jim's favorite cake is coconut cake. And so our wedding cake was coconut, and you're probably seeing, or you've seen pictures. And I thought she did something that I have never seen. Just before they put the cake out, she cut a slice of the cake out of the cake, and the little bride and groom that would sit on top of it, instead of standing on top, they were sitting down, and she had them sitting inside that pie shape where the piece of cake had been cut out. I don't know where she came up with that, but it was so cute. And I've saved that cake topper, and I'm sure some of you have seen it when I've shown you different places in the kitchen. But about a year ago, I moved it, and I now, because we have grandchildren, and I did a shelf on our bookcase in our living room, and I put the little wedding topper under a glass dome, and it's surrounded by pictures of Jim and me and our grandchildren, because we all know that that's what it's all about. That's what's important. And one thing I am going to tell you one day is a story about my mother. And I'm just so sad because my mother didn't get a chance to meet Jim. She would have loved Jim. And there's a reason, a connection. One day I'll tell you that story. Pretty much everybody who knows me personally knows that story. It's about Harold. Don't let me forget to tell you the story about Harold. And it has to do with the way Jim proposed to me. Pretty neat.
You're the air that I breathe. Yes, and you are all that I need. my comfort at night. You are the water that keeps me alive. You are the ground on which I stand. Yes, you are.